the night that shocked the world. On June 23, 1993, a woman named Lorena Bobbitt took a kitchen knife and cut off her husband's penis while he slept. This shocking act would make headlines around the world. But what led to this moment of violence? In the aftermath, Lorena drove away from their home, disposing of the severed organ in a nearby field before contacting the police. The incident quickly captured the public's attention, becoming a sensational story that dominated news cycles. As details emerged, the case ignited heated discussions about domestic violence, gender dynamics, and the complexities of marital relationships. But beneath the surface of this headline-grabbing event lay a deeper, more troubling story. What circumstances brought Lorena to this breaking point? To understand the full picture, we need to examine the lives of both Lorena and John Wayne Bobbitt, tracing their paths from childhood to that fateful night in June 1993. Lorena's early years. Lorena's story didn't begin on that infamous night in 1993. It started years earlier, in a place far from the American suburbs where she would later make headlines. What experiences in her youth set the stage for the woman she would become? The answer lies in a childhood marked by cultural expectations and a life-changing move. Born Lorena Gallo in 1969 in Bucay, Ecuador, Lorena grew up in a small town where traditional values and gender roles were deeply ingrained. Her family, while not wealthy, provided a stable environment. However, the societal expectations placed on young women in Ecuador during this time were often restrictive and limiting. From an early age, Lorena was taught that a woman's primary role was to be a wife and mother. Education, while encouraged, was often seen as secondary to preparing for domestic life. This cultural backdrop would play a significant role in shaping Lorena's views on relationships and her place in society. Despite these constraints, Lorena harbored dreams of a different life. She excelled in school and showed a particular aptitude for cosmetology. This skill would later become her ticket to a new life in the United States, but it also represented something more: a chance at independence and self-expression in a society that often stifled such ambitions in young women. At the age of 18, Lorena made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She left Ecuador for the United States, arriving on a student visa to study English and pursue her career in cosmetology. This move was not just a geographical change. It represented a seismic shift in her worldview and opportunities. Arriving in Virginia, Lorena found herself in a culture vastly different from the one she had left behind. The freedoms and expectations of American society were both exhilarating and overwhelming. She worked hard to adapt, learning English and immersing herself in her studies. However, the cultural values instilled in her during childhood remained deeply rooted, creating an internal conflict between her traditional upbringing and the new world she was experiencing. This period of transition was crucial in Lorena's development. She was caught between two worlds: the traditional expectations of her upbringing and the promise of independence in her new home. This tension would later play a significant role in her relationships and decision-making. As Lorena navigated her new life in America, she struggled with feelings of isolation and homesickness. The support system she had known in Ecuador was now thousands of miles away. This emotional vulnerability, combined with her youth and inexperience, left her susceptible to relationships that might not have been healthy or supportive. It was during this time of personal growth and cultural adjustment that Lorena met John Wayne Bobbitt. Their encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to that fateful night in 1993. But at the time, John represented something Lorena had been taught to value: the possibility of marriage and stability in a foreign land. Lorena's early years laid the foundation for the complex individual she would become. Her upbringing in Ecuador instilled in her traditional values and expectations about marriage and a woman's role. At the same time, her move to the United States exposed her to new ideas about independence and self-determination. This internal conflict between old and new, tradition and modernity, would play a crucial role in the events that were to unfold. This internal conflict set the stage for a fateful encounter. What happens when two people from vastly different worlds collide? For Lorena and John Wayne Bobbitt, their chance meeting would ignite a relationship that defied expectations and ultimately led to one of the most notorious incidents in modern crime history. In 1988, Lorena Gallo was working as a manicurist at a salon in Quantico, Virginia. John Wayne Bobbitt, a former Marine, was stationed nearby. Their paths crossed at a local dance club, where John was immediately drawn to Lorena's beauty and charm. For Lorena, John represented the American dream she had been seeking, a handsome Marine who could provide stability and security in her new country. Their courtship was swift and intense. John showered Lorena with attention and affection, presenting himself as a strong, protective figure. Lorena, still adjusting to American culture and longing for companionship, found comfort in John's assertive presence. Their different backgrounds seemed to complement each other at first, with John embodying the American ideals Lorena admired, and Lorena representing the traditional values John claimed to respect. However, beneath the surface of their whirlwind romance, warning signs began to emerge. John's behavior could be erratic and controlling, traits that Lorena initially misinterpreted as protectiveness. Her limited English and unfamiliarity with American dating norms made it difficult for her to recognize these red flags. Meanwhile, John's expectations of a submissive, traditional wife clashed with Lorena's growing desire for independence and self-expression. Despite these underlying tensions, the couple married in 1989, just 10 months after meeting. Lorena, at 20 years old, believed she was fulfilling her cultural expectations of becoming a wife while also securing her place in America. John, at 22, saw marriage as a natural progression and a way to assert his masculinity. The early days of their marriage were a mix of passion and conflict. Lorena worked hard to create a home and build a life together, while John struggled to maintain steady employment. Their financial situation became a source of constant stress, exacerbating the cracks in their relationship. Lorena's dreams of a stable, loving marriage began to crumble as she faced the harsh realities of their incompatibilities. Cultural differences played a significant role in their marital problems. Lorena's traditional upbringing clashed with John's more casual American attitudes, particularly regarding household responsibilities and financial management. Their communication styles were often at odds, with Lorena's more indirect approach conflicting with John's blunt manner. As time went on, the relationship deteriorated further. Arguments became more frequent and intense. Lorena felt increasingly isolated, caught between her marital obligations and her growing realization that the relationship was unhealthy. John's behavior became more volatile, with allegations of physical and emotional abuse surfacing later in court testimonies. The couple's sexual relationship also became a point of contention. Lorena would later claim that John was sexually selfish and occasionally forced himself on her. These experiences left her feeling violated and resentful, further eroding the foundation of their marriage. Despite the mounting problems, Lorena was reluctant to leave the marriage. Her cultural background emphasized the importance of keeping families together, and she feared the stigma of divorce. Additionally, her immigration status was tied to her marriage, adding another layer of complexity to her situation. While Lorena's motivations stem from her upbringing, John's behavior had roots in his own complex history. What experiences molded John Wayne Bobbitt into the volatile partner Lorena encountered? His story reveals unexpected twists that challenge our assumptions about the case. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 23, 1967 in Buffalo, New York. His childhood was marked by instability and frequent moves as his family relocated multiple times across the United States. This nomadic lifestyle made it difficult for John to form lasting friendships or establish a sense of belonging, potentially contributing to his later struggles with relationships and emotional connection. Growing up, John's family life was far from ideal. His parents' relationship was tumultuous, and they eventually divorced when John was still young. This early exposure to marital conflict may have shaped his understanding of relationships and set the stage for his own troubled marriage years later. John's childhood was also marked by academic difficulties. He struggled in school, possibly due to undiagnosed learning disabilities or the constant disruptions caused by frequent moves. These challenges in the classroom likely affected his self-esteem and future career prospects, setting the stage for the financial instability that would plague his marriage to Lorena. As a teenager, John began to exhibit behavioral problems. He was known for his quick temper and impulsive actions, traits that would persist into adulthood. These issues may have stemmed from the lack of stability in his early years, or could have been indicative of underlying mental health concerns that went unaddressed. In an attempt to find direction and discipline in his life, John enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in 1985. The military provided structure and a sense of purpose that had been lacking in his civilian life. During his service, John was stationed at various bases, including Quantico, Virginia, where he would later meet Lorena. John's time in the Marine Corps had a profound impact on his personality and worldview. The rigid hierarchy and emphasis on physical toughness reinforced traditional notions of masculinity. This military culture, combined with his already troubled background, may have exacerbated his tendencies towards aggression and control in personal relationships. While serving in the Marines, John developed a reputation as a hard-partying, womanizing young man. His peers described him as charismatic but often reckless, particularly when it came to alcohol consumption. These behaviors, which continued after his discharge from the military, would become a significant source of conflict in his marriage to Lorena. John's military career ended in 1991 after a car accident left him with a back injury. The sudden loss of his military identity and the physical limitations caused by his injury were significant blows to his self-image. This period of transition coincided with the early years of his marriage to Lorena, adding strain to their already fragile relationship. The combination of John's unstable childhood, his military experience, and the abrupt end to his service created a perfect storm of factors that contributed to his volatile behavior in his marriage. His difficulty maintaining steady employment after leaving the military added financial stress to the relationship further, exacerbating tensions with Lorena. As tensions mounted in the Bobbitt household, a powder keg of emotions threatened to explode. What final straw would ignite the fuse and lead to one of the most infamous crimes of the 1990s? The Bobbitt's marriage, once a beacon of hope for Lorena, quickly descended into a nightmare. The early years of their union were marked by increasing volatility, with John's behavior becoming more erratic and abusive. Lorena found herself trapped in a cycle of violence, her dreams of a happy American life crumbling around her. John's unemployment and financial instability added significant stress to their relationship. Lorena worked long hours as a manicurist to support them, while John struggled to hold down a job. This imbalance led to resentment on both sides, with John feeling emasculated and Lorena bearing the burden of being the primary breadwinner. The abuse Lorena endured was not just physical. She later testified about the emotional and sexual abuse she suffered at John's hands. In court, Lorena recounted instances of marital rape and physical violence, painting a picture of a marriage defined by fear and control. John's alcohol abuse exacerbated his violent tendencies, leaving Lorena constantly on edge. Lorena's mental state deteriorated as the abuse continued. She experienced symptoms of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which went largely undiagnosed and untreated. The isolation she felt as an immigrant, combined with the shame and cultural pressure to maintain her marriage, prevented her from seeking help or confiding in others about her situation. Despite the abuse, Lorena made several attempts to leave John. However, her immigration status, which was tied to her marriage, complicated matters. She feared deportation if she divorced John, trapping her in a seemingly impossible situation. This fear, coupled with her hope that John would change, led her to return to him multiple times. The events leading up to the night of June 23, 1993 were a culmination of years of abuse and mounting tension. In the days before the incident, the couple had several heated arguments. Lorena later testified that John had raped her just days before the attack, pushing her already fragile mental state to the breaking point. On the night of the attack, Lorena claimed that John had come home drunk and forced himself on her once again. After he fell asleep, Lorena went to the kitchen for a glass of water. It was then that she saw the knife that would become the instrument of her infamous act. In a state of dissociation, fueled by years of trauma and abuse, Lorena made the decision that would change both their lives forever. The severity of Lorena's actions shocked the world, but for those who understood the depth of her suffering, it was the tragic result of a system that had failed her repeatedly. The lack of support for domestic violence victims, the challenges faced by immigrants, and the societal pressure to maintain a facade of a happy marriage all contributed to this explosive outcome. The world was stunned, But the justice system faced an unprecedented challenge. How would the courts navigate a case that blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator? The trial of Lorena Bobbitt would force society to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence, mental health, and the failures of the legal system. In the aftermath of the attack, both Lorena and John Bobbitt found themselves at the center of a media storm. The case quickly became a national sensation, with news outlets clamoring for every detail. The public was divided, with some viewing Lorena as a victim pushed to the brink, while others saw her as a violent criminal. The legal proceedings began with John Wayne Bobbitt's trial in November 1993. He was charged with marital sexual assault, a crime that carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years. The prosecution presented evidence of John's history of abuse, including testimony from Lorena about repeated instances of rape and violence. However, John's defense team worked to discredit Lorena's claims, portraying her as unstable and vindictive. After a 7-day trial, the jury found John not guilty of marital sexual assault. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, with many advocates for domestic violence survivors expressing disappointment and concern about the message it sent to other victims. Lorena's trial began in January 1994, just 2 months after John's acquittal. She was charged with malicious wounding, which carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The prosecution argued that her actions were premeditated and unjustifiable, regardless of any abuse she may have suffered. Lorena's defense team, led by public defender James Lowe, pursued an insanity defense. They presented evidence of the years of abuse Lorena had endured, arguing that she was suffering from clinical depression and post-traumatic stress disorder at the time of the attack. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological effects of prolonged domestic violence, introducing many Americans to the concept of battered woman syndrome for the first time. The trial lasted 7 days and captured the nation's attention. Lorena took the stand to testify about her experiences, providing harrowing details of the abuse she had suffered. Her emotional testimony resonated with many viewers, particularly women who had experienced domestic violence themselves. On January 21, 1994, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lorena not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. The verdict stipulated that she would undergo a 45-day evaluation at a psychiatric hospital before being released. The decision was met with relief by Lorena's supporters, but sparked heated debates about gender roles, domestic violence, and the limits of self-defense. The media coverage of the trials was intense and often sensationalized. Late-night comedians made jokes at the expense of both John and Lorena, reducing a complex case of domestic violence to punchlines about male anatomy. However, the extensive coverage also brought unprecedented attention to the issues of marital rape and domestic abuse, forcing the public to confront realities that were often kept hidden behind closed doors. In the immediate aftermath of the trials, both John and Lorena attempted to capitalize on their newfound notoriety. John briefly pursued a career in adult entertainment, while Lorena made appearances on talk shows to share her story. However, these attempts at fame were short-lived, and both eventually retreated from the public eye to rebuild their lives. The Bobbitt case had far-reaching implications for how society and the legal system addressed domestic violence. It sparked discussions about the adequacy of existing laws to protect victims and the need for better support systems for those trapped in abusive relationships. Many domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls and requests for help in the wake of the trial, as more survivors felt empowered to speak out. The case also highlighted the complexities of mental health issues in the context of prolonged abuse. Lorena's insanity defense brought attention to the psychological toll of domestic violence and challenged simplistic notions of criminal responsibility. This nuanced understanding would influence future cases involving domestic abuse survivors who fought back against their abusers. In the years following the trial, Lorena Bobbitt has transformed her life and become an advocate for domestic violence survivors. She founded Lorena's Red Wagon, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing domestic violence and supporting its victims. Lorena has also rebuilt her personal life, remarrying and having a daughter. John Wayne Bobbitt's penis was successfully reattached after the incident, and he regained full functionality. However, his life has been marked by continued legal troubles and unsuccessful attempts at fame. He has faced multiple arrests for domestic violence against subsequent partners. The Bobbitt case continues to resonate in popular culture, serving as a touchstone for discussions about domestic violence, gender dynamics, and media sensationalism. It reminds us that behind every headline is a complex human story, often rooted in deep-seated societal issues that require our attention and understanding.